Good afternoon, Mayor and Council. This is an update on the Technical Advisory Committee. And when I speak about Technical Advisory Committee, I'm talking about earthquakes. This is the entity that was established via legislation in House Bill 2 of last session. And we met as the Technical Advisory Committee for the first time 2 weeks ago tomorrow. Unfortunately, it was at the same time as our regular session and some committee meetings, so my apologies for not being able to attend those, but I thought it was very important to attend this first Technical Advisory Committee. A quick overview on the legislation and why we're here and how we got here. Most of you are already familiar with this, but this is for those folks that may or may not be familiar with the background and how we got here. As we know, we've been having some seismic activity. Fortunately, we haven't had any recently. Hopefully that stays the status quo as well, although we've learned in previous months that they can come and go. Regardless, there are still a lot of questions out there as to, from our residents, from our businesses, not only here in Irving, but from all over the DFW area and even outside the DFW area, on what could be causing or why there's an increase in the seismic activity here in North Texas. In North Texas, we are not the only ones in the country to experience this. You may recall about 2 weeks ago, the USGS came out with an updated forecast, for the lack of a simple term, well, simply stated, that for the next year, we have here in the city of Irving a 3 to 5% chance of an earthquake that is equal to, in terms of percentage, some areas, not dictating a magnitude of that quake, but that is equal to the same percentages that some areas of the San Andreas Fault have in California. Again, maybe not relative to the same magnitude, but in likelihood of having an earthquake, we have an equal, if not even greater, opportunity, or a chance, I should say, not an opportunity, but a chance to have an earthquake in 2016 than in most areas of the country. So a lot of questions are out there. You may recall at the beginning of the last legislative session, House Bill 2, which is the basic budget bill, had already had identified in it $2.5 million for the purchase of equipment, for seismic equipment. That came off of a recommendation from the Energy Committee to have that in there. What was added to through the great efforts of our crews here in Irving, our consultants, our lobbyists, John and his work in tandem with a number of other folks, especially at the BEG, Dr. Tinker, who is responsible for the BEG, we were able to secure an additional, by the end of the session, an additional $2 million for the research and the analysis of the information that would be achieved and received from the placement of all those monitors throughout the state. The TAC itself is a 9-member committee that was identified to help oversee the project and be an advisory group to the BEG for this project. It's a 9-member committee. There are 5 assigned positions and 4 unassigned. Irving has been granted, and I've been assigned in one of the unassigned spots. The rest are dictated based upon having either industry representatives, and by industry I mean oil and gas, or academic representatives from various higher education institutions that are involved in geology and seismology throughout the state. HB2 directed the creation of the TAC and to advise the BG on the equipment placement. And the BEG is required to provide a report to the governor and various committees by December 1st of this year. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But the responsible organizations, the overarching organization that's responsible for the general direction of this is the Bureau of Economic Geology at the University of Texas, Austin. And Dr. Tinker is the individual that is the director there. That is the umbrella group. There are 2 entities that are going to be responsible and at the front end of this effort that report to and work with the BEG. The first is TexNet. This is a brand new entity. This is an entity that is responsible for the placement and the monitoring of the seismic equipment and all the gathering of the data. Just as the name implies, they're creating a network of machines around the state to better be able to register and to identify the depth, the impacts, the magnitude, et cetera, of all the seismic activities throughout the state. The second one is an existing organization called the Center for Integrated Seismic Research, or CISR. It's a multi-entity group that has at it government, industry, and even some foundation support financially to take the information, to take the data that comes from TexNet and be able to analyze that and begin to make analytics and directions and recommendations based upon the information that they receive. The BEG, while we've been waiting for the TAC to be formed, and since the ensuing period that the legislation has passed and the funding's been made available, the BEG has formed the TexNet and spent the past 6 to 8 months hiring the qualified staff and beginning the purchase of all the seismic equipment, that $2.5 million. It is anticipated that all of those pieces of equipment will be in place by September of this year. There's quite a process. They already have 20 or 16 stations out there. They're going to be adding 22 new additional stations all across the state to fill in gaps and to fill in areas, to coordinate with neighboring states on where they have some of their equipment placed as well. But going ahead and securing the land leases, getting the permissions and the approvals from the property owners, that does take time. Most of the equipment has already been purchased, and the folks that will be guiding and directing and staffing TexNet have been hired. Of the remaining $2 million that is being used for the analytics by the legislation directive, it's also required to be shared with other institutes of higher ed here in the States. And specifically, we were interested in this in Irving because SMU has done so much work for the city of Irving. When we first started having our significant seismic activity at the end of 2014, the beginning of 2015, SMU was the first ones to show up. And we really appreciate and continue to appreciate all the great work that SMU has done. They continue to have their machines out there. They are continuing to monitor Irving and all the DFW area. So as different seismic activities occur, we can gauge them and find out what we have going on. So $400,000 of that $2 million is being distributed out to these other entities, which includes SMU. Our first meeting was about 3.5 hours. A lot of it was, you would expect in a first meeting, a lot of housekeeping, a lot of directions of, are our meetings going to be open, not open to the public, location, et cetera. We want to make sure, I believe very strongly, we want to make sure that this should be a very open, very transparent, very public process, that everybody can know and understand what we're looking at, what we're advising the BEG to do. There was a significant discussion, and this actually is what took up most of the time, a significant discussion on the mission and the scope of the advisory council, especially when it relates to how to focus the funding for the BEG. And it came down to a discussion of what was written in the legislation versus what is anticipated and expected to come out of the study eventually. And specifically, the legislation calls for, and I'm going to quote here from the legislation, for the funding of a total of about $4.5 million, funding for the 2-year period beginning on the effective date of this act for the purchase and development of the seismic equipment, the maintenance of the seismic networks, the modeling of the reservoir behavior for systems of wells in the vicinities of faults, and the establishment of a technical advisory committee. The legislative language is very specific, but it's also very limited. And CISR is responsible for taking that data and understanding the social impacts and being able to take the data and be able to create recommendations on this is how cities can use this for infrastructure upgrades as needed, what we should be doing with infrastructure, what we should be looking at for building codes, the social impacts. In essence, all the information that our residents and businesses that we are looking for, that's taking the data, analyzing the data, and then making assessments of that data and recommendations from that data. The legislative language doesn't necessarily dictate that. It's limited in its scope. So there was a significant discussion as to the mission and the scope of what we're looking for. And so we decided that it's going to be very important to define the mission and to have that scope identified. So we're working with the governor's office. We're going to be seeking some advice from their general counsel to help guide and direct to that process. But I believe it's very important. The end result of what we're trying to do here is to understand what's going on underneath us and why we've had an increase in seismic activity. That is the focus, that is the goal, and that needs to be the end result. And we're going to continue to fight and to continue to work for that and to hit that angle. So we had an update from Alex Savidis, and Alex is the director of TexNet, came in from Greece, I believe, and is very happy to be a part of this process and let you have a sense of the impact and the chatter that is out there in the geologic world about what's going on here in Texas. When this advertisement went out for the director of TexNet with the creation of TexNet, they asked Alex why he's interested and had he heard, and he goes, everybody has heard, and this is a quote from Alex, everybody has heard of TexNet around the world and wants to be involved in this process. So this is a significant undertaking by the state of Texas, and it's one that is well known and widely recognized as one that's going to be a very comprehensive process. We also received an update from Peter Hennings in Scissor. Just went through that. Timeline and expectations. Again, we're anticipating that all the equipment will be out by the end of September. It's going to start gathering data. This first report that's going to be submitted to the governor and to the legislative committees is not going to have any answers. We'll only have had probably a month or two of initial data. It's going to be important, I believe, for us as a city, for the BEG, and for all entities to help manage the communications and manage expectations as to how long and the extent that this process is going to take. It's going to be a multi-year process in order to understand. So this first report that's going to the governor's office is not going to have any causality. It's not going to be able to identify what's going on. It takes a matter of time to be able to get the system created, because in Texas, we almost literally started from nothing. We had some machines out there, but we didn't have enough machines, and we didn't really have anybody analyzing the data in a coordinated or comprehensive manner. So that December report will provide an accounting of the cost and the data collected to date, a report on the preliminary reservoir modeling, and identifying the cost to maintain TexNet beyond 2016. So all in all, it was a very good, very productive meeting. I believe it's going to be important to maintain our vigilance and our dedication to this process for years to come. And with that, I'll be happy to answer any questions.
Oscar?
I got a question on the 22 new ones, seismographs. Have they identified what location they're going to be? Any in Irving or North Texas area?
Yes, they have identified those locations. There are the current seismometers and seismographs that are already in place, and there are already a number of different seismograph and seismometers throughout the state. However, there are not going to be any additional permanent locations here in the North Texas region. They feel that they already have that covered with the existing network that's been provided by SMU and other entities. There's not an anticipation that those machines are going to be needed or pulled out. In addition to the permanent locations, there's also going to be the purchase of mobile machines that TexNet can use, that if there's an increase or start of seismic activity anywhere in the state, they can immediately mobilize those mobile units and get those to those locations very quickly. That will also help Irving if in years ahead, for some reason, any number of these machines need to get pulled out or have to get pulled out. We would then have those mobile machines available. So from a coverage perspective, we feel that we have the necessary machines now, And we feel that we have the backup needed with the mobile machines that will be purchased by TexNet to be able to come in if needed.
So what you said, none of the 22 new ones will be in North Texas?
No.
Is that correct?
No, that is
So the
correct.
existing ones that are here, are they tied into the network?
Yes, all
Evaluation?
TexNet will be putting all this data and collection together, so they'll all be tied into the network, and that's the whole goal of making sure that SMU is included with the $400,000 to help them continue to provide that network of machines that are currently in place.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you, Mayor. I was just curious, and I don't mean to flip a question, but was there any discussion about, at this meeting, the conclusions that have been reached up in Oklahoma in terms of how they have made some decisions? Was there any discussion around that?
No, there was no direct discussion in this meeting. This meeting was set up to do most of the housekeeping, get an update on where we're at. But Councilmember Palmer, I would definitely anticipate those discussions coming up in future meetings.
Yeah, because, I think that, our railroad commission, from what you read in the press, has taken a hard position, not wanting to listen to anybody. Well, it just can't be caused by, fracking. And I don't think we'd have wastewater wells necessary if we weren't fracking as well. So I'm really interested to press that point.
Yeah. In the reservoir modeling, that was even specifically in the language. The reservoir modeling is centered around understanding the impact of the wastewater injection wells on faults, and that is a very specific focus of the study. So looking forward to those results.
John?
Did you?
Okay.
Yeah, I wanted to kind of explore that point also, that I hope that you take advantage of the scientific arm of this very esteemed committee. Someone like Scott Tinker and the people at SMU, and are proactive in anticipating, and it's kind of what David was touching on. The Volcanis fault line goes all the way to Oklahoma. We know that they are having seismic activity that's starting to register in the 4 level.
They've even had 1 out of 5, Councilmember Dan, if you don't mind me saying.
That
They even had
is
one of them.
very, very alarming. And we need to be proactive in anticipating what's just across the state line. And we're on the same tectonic plate. So you got the best expert you could ask for. And as far as this taking years, yeah, it probably will take years, but I sure hope it doesn't take as many years as it took to prove that smoking causes cancer scientifically.
I think what's going to help is all of the data that SMU has already collected. When SMU came out, they immediately dispatched over 20 machines throughout Irving, and they were able to catch that swarm right at its beginning, and they received vast amounts of data, and that is very helpful. To have SMU react that quickly and to be able to work with Jason in our emergency management department to get the placement of those machines all over Irving within 48 hours after that first significant event was a significant accomplishment, and having that data is going to hopefully help speed up that process for the analysis.
Gerald?
Well, I think my question is a little bit, might be rhetorical, it may be beyond the information that you have, but it's sort of pointed in the same direction as what John and David were touching on, is what is the inclination of the Railroad Commission taking this data and actually acting on it in our legislature and so forth, because there seems to be an inclination to take this scientific data and kind of sweep it under the rug and say, well, it doesn't really, we have a different opinion. And of course, we know that the Railroad Commission gets its power from the legislature, and there just seems to be a little bit of a political rub or conflict or something like that. And I don't know if this committee is going to address that, so it may be rhetorical. A rhetorical comment, but did any of that kind of information come up or discussion come up in the?
Not specifically that discussion, but I do know from previous railroad commissions that SMU has presented, excuse me, SMU study results, I believe specifically on the Cleburne and the Azle swarms were presented to the Railroad Commission, and I believe that the Railroad Commission either did not comment or did not accept on those results. But I cannot speak for the Railroad Commission on as to why or why not.
Oscar?
Yes, I have one additional question, kind of triggered off of Mr. Danis talked about being proactive and probably what chatted about in your meeting, but concern about increasing maybe the building codes. Is there any discussion on that? Because if they see activities going on, is our staff even considering what we would have to do to get our building codes updated?
We have formed a working group with the city of Dallas, and Gary's involved with that. Jason's involved with that here in our city, and that is a focus area. What they need is the information. If we are going to be changing any of our building codes, to what level do we need to be changing them to? In order to know and understand that, we need to know and understand what the threat and the likelihood of what level of earthquake that we think, or seismic activity that we would have in this area. So in answer to your direct question, Councilmember Ward, I can't answer specifically what we need to be changing that at. This process is going to provide that information, and that's what Scissor is specifically identified to help out with. TexNet collects the data, Scissors then takes that data and help with the application of it throughout the system. And we'll be looking for that information and that data and that analysis coming out of Scissor to help us with that.